Right, hello and welcome to tonight's Scrutiny Committee meeting. And this is the COVID-19 Scrutiny Committee. Welcome everybody. This is our final meeting, in fact, of the year. So we're just looking at two items tonight. One is an education update and the other is our final report and the recommendations we want to make. So thank you, councillors, for coming along this evening. Our first item is apologies for absence and any substitutions. I'm not aware of any apologies for absence. Anna Marie, would there be any apologies for absence or substitutions? I think that's a no.
No, sorry.
Yeah.
None.
That's fine. We're still getting there with the mute and unmute buttons, aren't we? Okay, so item 2 is any urgent matters. I haven't been told that there's any urgent matters. Does anyone have an urgent matter?
No.
Nope. Great. Okay, then we can go into item 3, declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest? Nope.
Yeah, no.
Great. Then we go to item 4, any matters to be considered in private. There are no matters to be considered in private, so the meeting will be entirely public. So item 5 is minutes of the previous meeting. And this is to ask you to have a look at the minutes of the last meeting and to agree on whether they are an accurate record and with any amendments. Anybody got any issues with the minutes of the last meeting? Any amendments?
Agreed, myself.
You're happy with it? Anybody else got any amendments? I'm trying to read the agenda at the same time, so I can't always see you. I just had a quick question, actually, Anna Marie. So it was on page 7 where I think I asked about, it's the very bottom of page 7, some authorities had been given funding to introduce vaccination champions and Ealing hadn't. So I think I'd asked about why we weren't provided with any funding. And Anna replied she thought the bids for this funding had been targeted at certain boroughs. I don't think that was exactly it. They hadn't been targeted at certain boroughs, but I think you did have to have a COVID action plan. So I don't think it's entirely true that they were, certain boroughs only could apply. So I wonder if we could just rephrase it slightly.
Okay.
It was boroughs who had an action plan.
Okay, I will amend those minutes.
Sorry, I hadn't noticed it when I saw these minutes initially. I just think, just to be entirely accurate, because I don't think they were, it didn't say, only X, Y, and Z boroughs can apply.
Okay, that's fine.
Great. Okay. Everybody okay with the minutes otherwise? So are they agreed subject to that one amendment?
Agreed, Chair.
Yes,
Excellent.
yes, agreed.
Agreed.
Brilliant. Okay, then item 6 is the main item we're going to look at this evening, and that is education update from Julie Lewis, who is our Director of Learning Standards and School Partnerships. And we did look at education at our first meeting, but because there's been so many changes, and the panel was really interested in what was happening around education, we thought we'd have a final look at it again tonight. Julie has sent around slides in advance and is going to speak to those this evening. So I will hand over to Julie.
Thank you very much. Good evening, everyone. I'm just going to get my slides up. Can you see those okay? Lovely. Thank you. So I thought the panel would be interested in really what's happened since January, and an overview of some of the kind of emerging issues around the recovery of schools, and also the work that we're doing collectively to address those issues. I just wanted to flick back to that period between Christmas, after Christmas, and before schools reopened. So just to remind you that during that time, it was only children of critical workers, children with education healthcare plans, and vulnerable children who were attending school. And overall in Ealing, 11% of children attended school between January and the 5th of March. So just below the national, but that's more a reflection of critical worker children than other groups. So about 40% of our children with plans attended, and about 39% of children with social workers during that period. So 11% overall. And if you remember last time, I highlighted some discrepancies in attendance, and particularly around different parts of the borough where attendance was particularly low in Southall primary schools. And we also noticed some discrepancies in the number of children attending with education and healthcare plans across schools. So we'd flagged those discrepancies up. Now, the good news is that since since children returned to school, and if you remember, it was all primary age children from the 8th of March, and then secondary age children were staggered back in line with the testing regime. So I took these figures from last week because that gives us the most accurate picture when we were expecting all children to be back. And it is a very, very positive picture. So during the course of that week, we had 92% of all of our children back in school. Very high levels, higher than the national at 89%. And then for children with education and healthcare plans, 86% back, and 83% of children with the social workers. So on the whole, we're really pleased with those figures. In the last week, and I haven't included this on the slide, we have had some schools still impacted by COVID, and by Friday of last week, we'd had 700 children off school, either because of close contact tracing or where families were impacted by COVID. So you can still see that these figures are subject to quite a lot of turbulence. And I think we had 12 schools that were affected last week by cases. So that scenario is likely to continue for a while. And then we did a look at different parts of the borough, and actually, although Southall is still the lowest in terms of attendance, not falling far behind the other four kind of geographical areas of the borough. So overall, it's a really positive picture. I wanted to just draw your attention really to the kind of education and inequality impacts that we expected and that we are picking up and beginning to understand in a little bit more detail. And as we expected, these sort of impacts across the education community are very uneven, and they do correlate directly with social deprivation and BME factors. And we know that the inequalities that existed before COVID have actually deepened over the last year. We don't yet quite know what the picture is in terms of what we're calling learning recovery gaps, and that's something that schools are working hard to understand at the moment. But we do know that the early years developmental gaps are already evident. Those children, and I'm going to come to that a little bit later, children that in the earliest years, really between the ages of 2 and 4, who've missed out on those crucial social interactions that help with their language and cognitive development. And we've also noticed more significant impacts on our young people who would have progressed to more technical and practical and vocational courses, where clearly they weren't able to access the kind of learning online that young people doing other types of subjects could do. So that's another group that we're watching closely. So we're seeing those social and economic impacts cutting across all aspects of child development, and the demand for mental health and wellbeing services now at a premium. And we know as well that for around about 8% of our young people in our secondary schools, the risk of disengagement with education, is high. And we also know we've also seen a rise in significant youth violence in the borough, and a rise also in robbery, and other sort of risky behaviours associated with disengagement. In terms of working together to tackle these impacts, point to the work of the Ealing Learning Partnership, but I also wanted to talk a little bit about the remote learning offer, because it was something that we were very worried about during the summer. But I think what's been very striking is that really since September, the remote learning offer for children and families right across the spectrum and right across from primary to secondary has actually been really strong, and most young people were able to engage with that very successfully. 90% of our schools belong to the Ealing Learning Partnership and have access to all of our networks and support. And we now have a powerful recovery plan really that runs for the next 2 years. And focused really around these 5 areas of learning and achievement, identifying gaps, mobilising practices across schools. And we've also got some work focused on Southall, which I'll come to in a second. Work around SEN and inclusion, really ramping up the amount of professional support and access to specialist training for schools. A focus on safeguarding and wellbeing, looking at enhanced monitoring to identify children at risk, and putting in additional surgeries and support for designated safeguarding leads in schools. So weekly opportunities for them to bring problems to the attention of multi-agency teams. And then with progression and pathways to employment, we're very much focused on those young people at risk of not being in education, training and employment, and creating virtual links between them and employers to open up to make sure that we're keeping those aspirations high and helping them to focus on, particularly in year 11, in what is, quite a difficult time for young people. So lots of links also with Ealing College, and some really productive work there at getting children on the right courses. And then we're also focused on recruitment and retention, because during the whole pandemic, as you will imagine, morale within the teaching profession has been quite low. School leaders in particular have been under huge pressure. So we're doing quite a lot of work as well to boost morale and to make sure that we keep education an attractive profession for our staff. So I've talked briefly about mental health and well-being. Massive increase in demand for services. I think, perhaps in some ways, schools are struggling to see the wood for the trees because there's so much going on, so much out there. But that I think what we're trying to do at the moment is help our schools to navigate the support and to link it most appropriately to need. And what we're also trying to do is to increase parents' understanding of the kind of support and services that they can access. So rather than it being dependent on what schools can initiate through their own provision and referral routes. We're noticing GPs referring parents and pupils back to school for counselling, and schools reporting cases not meeting the threshold for CAMS. So it is a very complex arena, and we think it's going to take quite a long time for young people to really feel included and held and supported in the way that they were being before the pandemic. And then I'm just going to draw your attention to some of the impacts on early years, and these are very significant because the number of parents registering for free provision has significantly dropped. Dropped by 46% in those registering for free 2-year-old funded education and childcare. So that's a major decline, and and I think that those kind of crucial opportunities early on are having an impact on children's cognitive and emotional and social and linguistic development. And then that in turn will make it quite challenging for children to bridge that transition from nursery to reception and school. We've also seen, my colleagues drew my attention to the babies born in lockdown, in many cases still not crawling, simply struggling with overcrowding and not having the space to do so. So all of these sort of unintended impacts, or of course none of the impacts were intended, but perhaps less obvious impacts on child development and well-being. Increase in safeguarding issues for children, a very significant rising number of domestic violence cases reported, and again correlating with areas of higher disadvantage, but not necessarily so. And a number of children where their special educational needs have not been identified in the way that they would have been pre-COVID. So that in itself creating a scenario of needs not being met early enough. The early years team are working hard to plan that phased return, to promote the take-up of places, and to work on transition arrangements to really support parents, begin to help each other, and also work with schools to support that transition from nursery to school. Much more focus on SEND in those early years, and probably what will help as well is the early years foundation stage reforms, which become statutory in September as well. And then I thought I'd touch briefly on additional resources and support for schools and families, because the panel was interested in this before. So the voucher scheme has now officially ended, but food hampers still available to those who need them. And the winter grant scheme, if you remember, has been extended to include the Easter break. And I've just set out there the allocations to those households who are eligible for that. We have had a very high take up, and we're continuing to identify those families who are eligible. And the other area that the panel was interested in before, I think back in January, was around access to devices, to laptops. And it's actually been a really positive picture. By February, schools reporting much higher levels of engagement with remote learning, and also much better supplies and distribution of hardware. And in fact, I just had an update just before the meeting to say that schools have now really maxed out fully on the supply of devices. So I think many schools are going to try and leave those devices with children, certainly over the coming months, to support the potential for ongoing disruption, whatever that might look like. Schools are obliged to continue to offer remote learning where children can't attend school, and either because they're shielding or self-isolating. I didn't mention this before, but there are significant numbers of our children overseas, where families went back to stay with relatives earlier on during the pandemic, and those children are still overseas, and clearly that there are a number of financial barriers at the moment restricting children's return. So that picture is something we're trying to get a grasp of at the moment, but at the moment those children are still accessing remote learning and doing so with the support of schools. That's all I wanted to say on that. And then the other key resource is the holiday activities and food programme. So the government announced this in November, and wanted all local authorities to support the rollout of a holiday programme that really aimed to support children to be active, to eat healthily, and to be socially connected during the holidays, with an entitlement that looked like 4 hours a day for 4 days a week, and that operated through Easter, Christmas and summer. And the Family Information Service has been working incredibly hard to try and make the money work on this, because it's not a lot of money. I think it's about £98 per child to fund that holiday provision. And we've been really sort of grappling with how to make the most of that money to reach the children who need it the most. So certainly for Easter, it's a combination of a virtual offer, an online offer with brochures, online activity brochures for parents, and then some focused face-to-face provision for those children who need it the most. And then I just wanted to come back to Southall. I chaired a meeting in early March, and I brought together partners from public health, education, social care, early years, skills and employment, the voluntary sector, and Let's Go Southall. And we looked, we had a really powerful hour and a half listening to each other and the kind of impacts that we'd recorded across all of those service areas of the council, and I don't think any of these things will surprise you, but we picked up that, you know, of all the areas in Ealing's, certainly families in Southall were the hardest hit by the pandemic. And, you know, if I'm not going to read this list out because it corresponds with the impacts that I highlighted earlier, but just to pull them all together into one place paints quite a picture of potential and long-lasting health and education and social inequalities. So what we wanted to do is to think about the role that schools might play in their sort of influence that they have with families and as hubs in communities, to really help to signpost support services and the tremendous work of the voluntary sector, to bring it all together and to really bring some coherence around it for families. So the kind of things that we're working on together are around promoting attendance and positive engagement. And I have to say, the picture of its school attendance is actually really positive now. Support around early years to address those developmental gaps, support around mental health and well-being for pupils, but also support for parents and particularly for women. And learning recovery and digital skills, working with adult learning to help to get people confident into getting back into work. We're also doing some work around linking young people directly to the skills for job pathways, and really focusing on trying to build on the work of Let's Go Southall around active lifestyles and social connectedness, and trying to link together those Let's Go Southall enablers and the super organisers that have been created with each of our schools. And we think if we can do that, it will help to bring everybody together and to kind of mobilise resilience within the community. And then Councillor Costigan asked me to just touch on, this is the final slide actually, asked me to touch on the award of qualifications in the summer. And you'll know that there are no examinations this year, and there weren't any public examinations last year. And that places young people in, you know, quite an uncertain and precarious position, particularly in terms of progressing to the next stage of their lives. we're still waiting for final guidance on how the whole system's going to work, but it is based on teachers submitting a body of evidence to demonstrate what students can do, and then the exam boards are planning to quality assure the work of schools between March and the summer. There's all sorts of hazards in front of us, and the workload for schools is huge because you're trying to pull together a body of evidence for children who've had their education disrupted for the last 12 months. So we are expecting the next few months to be really quite tough on schools. I think there's no magic bullet in terms of addressing this kind of problem, but having met with our high school heads this morning, I know that our high schools are working together to adopt a consistent approach to really avoid a scenario where you've got mass appeals going on and all of the uncertainty that can create. So that's it from me, and I'm very happy to take any questions that you have.
Great, thanks, Julie. And I think if we can undo share screen,
Of course.
then yeah, that's great, thanks. Great. Well, I think I had a question already from Councillor Steed. If anybody else has a question, just either say in the chat you've got a question, or put your hand up virtually, or just wave at me in the old-fashioned way. But Councillor Steed, off you go.
Hi, thank you, Councillor. Thank you, Julie, for the presentation. Just one thing. You mentioned quite early on that I think the quote was a good engagement with remote learning, and I'm just wondering what that conclusion is based upon. Is there any particular criteria that's been used to come to that conclusion? I ask because anecdotally, as is probably fairly obvious, it's remote learning is a challenge for teachers and also for pupils. I'm just wondering, at this stage in the process, where remote learning now will have been going on for the best part of a year almost, what evidence is there to suggest that actually it's going well? Which is not. I mean, I hope it is going well, but I'm just wondering what criteria is being used to come to that conclusion. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, it's a good question. We did a lot of work in monitoring, is not quite the right word, but working with our schools to ensure that they were confident in delivering the expectation. And if you remember, the government introduced a mandatory requirement for schools to provide a certain number of hours per day of remote high quality remote learning for children, and that could take all sorts of there wasn't a single approach. A blended approach is what most schools do, and schools themselves, we ask schools to develop their own systems for monitoring attendance of children and for reporting back on where there were significant issues with children's engagement with remote learning. And if we're talking about the most vulnerable, then certainly we did a lot of work to scrutinise what schools were doing to support the most vulnerable children, those who had not kind of logged on or not engaged regularly. So we were very overall very satisfied with the lengths and measures that schools went to secure that engagement. If you're talking about engagement as in how kind of motivated were children, I dropped in on about 10 lessons towards the end of February in a primary school, and the children looked tired and quite exhausted actually, and I think it's true to say that, you know, really by January, February, it's clear that children were sort of struggling to learn in this way, and were in desperate need of face-to-face attention. But certainly where schools provided that level of one-to-one care and attention, which most schools and certainly most primary schools are able to do, you know, I think they did a pretty good job in the circumstances.
Chair.
Great. Oh, sorry, Mrs. Mida. I've got two other people with their
Okay.
hands up, and then
Okay.
I'll call you.
All
Yeah,
right.
great.
No problem.
So
No
I've got Councillor Lissardi is next.
Hi, thanks, Ginny, for that really thorough presentation. Just had a couple of questions. So you say that the heads in Ealing have got together and looking at coming up with a set of standards that they equally, you know, subscribe to, so that you avoid things like grade inflation. Would that only work on a national basis though? Because what you might find is another borough in Brent, for example, they don't do that, and there will be discrepancies between, you know, because we've you know, Ealing's tried to come up with a sort of a fair way of doing it, and then maybe other places haven't. So that may put us at a disadvantage. And also, I was just wondering, over the summer activities, you were saying that children are entitled to about 4 weeks of additional activities over the summer. And I'm just wondering, how will that work? Will our schools be involved in doing that? And if our teachers are involved in doing that, will that not just be a huge burden, given that they've been working so hard, you know, during the course of the year? So will it be managed by external people, or how will it be managed, I suppose, is the question. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. So first of all, the current system for awarding grades to students is almost entirely based on the integrity of individual teachers and schools, and there's absolutely no way in which it can be standardized other than through very high quality internal standardization systems. You know, we're blessed with outstanding and good secondary schools, and we are very confident that within departments within those schools, that internal standardization systems are secure. So it's the quality of those systems that will be tested in the next few months. There will be sample QAing from the exam boards. We don't quite know what that's going to look like, but certainly the exam boards are delivering in March effectively standardized tests that schools can use in order to kind of benchmark their own grading systems. So there are quite a number of measures being put in place to support the award of grades fairly. But, you know, having been a teacher myself, you know, if you've got a student who's right on a borderline, let's say a DC borderline, is obviously different now with the numerical system, then obviously you're going to give them the benefit of the doubt and put them just over the border into the higher grade. So I think we are expecting, you know, some minimal grade inflation, but I don't expect that it's going to be excessive. I think what we don't quite know is how the sort of normal distribution curve, if you like, of the algorithm, how that will be applied once those grades have been awarded. And that's the bit that's a bit of an unknown at the moment. So it's certainly not an ideal landscape. It's really hard to see what would have been better. And I think we've just got to kind of get through it as best we can. In terms of summer activities, it will be external providers who provide the summer activities. I think it's 4 hours a day, 4 days a week. And, you know, we've got a number of external providers working in Ealing, very close affinity with schools. So it won't be schools themselves who will be asked to run those programs, although there's nothing to stop them if they wish to do so.
Great, Thanks, Julie. So I think you said the algorithm is back again. I thought the government said it definitely wasn't going to involve an algorithm this year.
Yeah, it perhaps the algorithm isn't quite the right term to use. I think once all of the grades have been submitted, somebody somewhere is going to decide what percentage of A stars will be awarded, what percentage of A's, what percentage of B's, or in the case of 9s, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So it's that I was referring to really, which you might call the normal distribution curve of awarding grades, and it's that bit where we might see some some quality assurance come in, particularly schools that perhaps historically have been turning out X percentage of the higher grades, and then suddenly if there's a big jump, they might look at those schools.
Great. Okay, Councillor Donnelly was next.
Thank you, Chair. Although that last bit Julie's last answer did strike a chord in the sense of we seem to be going around the block again, because what brought the algorithm crashing down last year was the question about the exceptionally and unusually high performing pupil in a normally averagely performing school, and the algorithm couldn't cope with that scenario, and that brought the whole sort of roof crashing down. So I mean, I think it's interesting that here we are and we're using mights and maybes, and we think and a year ago we could excuse all of that because none of us knew the sort of the hellstorm that was ahead of us. But it's quite hard. This is pretty much where we are with everything, isn't it? We don't know at the last minute what the strategy on the homeless is going to be from one renewal to another. We don't know what the strategy on evictions is going to be from one renewal to another. We don't even know, as members of this committee, how we'll meet the next time it comes together, because the government won't tell us what its approach is going to be to renewing its emergency legislation on virtual meetings. So to the one person who was watching this meeting the last time I checked on the feed, watch this space. But that wasn't what I was going to ask about. You answered the question I was going to ask about what was the fate of the laptops. So that's good news. You talked about the incidences which were inevitable, I guess, of COVID cropping up and bubbles, cohorts being impacted. How are the schools dealing with the implementation of the lateral flow tests and this whole new area of responsibility that they've been given? How are they managing in that, and do they feel that they are managing it? They are managing it well. And I guess another question was, if we're talking about the summer, maybe this is coming back to where I came in. What do we know about free school meals for the summer, as opposed to merely, I suppose, get fed if you sign up to an activity programme?
Okay, thank you. So I have to say that the response of our secondary schools and the college to the lateral flow tests was phenomenal. And so, for example, we were expecting around about 30% take up in some areas of the borough. And I was talking to the head at Dormers Wells High after a couple of days, and she had 98% responsiveness to the parents' consent. So I think it's fair to say that the efforts and persistence of our schools in terms of their kind of commitment to the public health endeavour has just been extraordinary. And as expected, it hasn't yielded a huge number of asymptomatic positive cases, but where it has, those we've obviously had an effective mechanism to avoid having to send home large numbers of students. So when I looked at the data last week, there was only one secondary school that had to send some students home. All the others were primary schools. So I think actually it's been as successful as it can be. In terms of the summer free school meal provision, I don't have the answer to that, but I will find out and get it to you.
Okay, thanks, Julie. Does that answer your question, Councillor Donnelly?
Yes, thank you very much.
Okay, Councillor Midda.
Thank you, Chair. I'm very thankful to the officer. He explained very nicely. My question that in slide learning and achievements, the more focus on Southall. So what kind of steps should be taken to bring the improvement in Southall? Thank you.
Thank you very much. We spoke to some of our Southall heads about Southall in Focus, and their first reaction was, you know, why are you picking on us? We're resilient. Our children are in school, and we will recover quickly. And it struck me that actually over the course of the pandemic, the Southall schools as a collective body have become a very, very strong and unified collaborative of schools. And so we think a combination of schools working with the voluntary sector, working with us, the Ealing Learning Partnership, to help to support families who, so for example, a number of families were struggling to support their children with remote learning because they themselves weren't confident in accessing technology. So we want to do some work there on building the digital skills of parents, and that's just one area. So I think if we can start to see schools as being as sort of hubs within their community, and for parents and families to say what kind of support or what kind of activities they themselves would want to lead on behalf of other families, we can help to organise that and put them in contact with the right people. So I think Let's Go Southall is very much about developing new leaders in the community and giving the confidence to individuals to lead on behalf of their communities, whatever that might be, whether it's physical activity, mental health activities, those kinds of things we want to try and mobilise.
Can I ask Chair?
Yeah,
one more?
Go ahead,
Yeah.
Councillor Midda. Yeah.
This is very good. I know the Let's Go Southall, I'm the member of that. They are trying their best to improve in Southall everywhere. The main problem in Southall is the computer problems. If there's 2-3 hubs, they can open the teaching to the parents. It's more helpful.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
Right. Okay. I've got Councillor Sumner and Councillor Mahmood, and I'm not sure which one put their hand up first, but I'll be polite and offer it to the opposition party. Councillor Sumner.
Well, thank you, Chair. I actually put my question in the chat, so I didn't have any hands shown. Just to follow up, please, from the previous question, not Councillor Midda's, but I think it was probably the question on testing. Who is it who's chasing up the testing to make sure that results are coming back? Okay, so all the children are doing their tests and they're being sent off, I presume. So I presume someone is checking that they're coming back. Is that correct?
Yes, so I'm just trying to find the date. All the evidence has to be gathered before May half term, and there's a deadline in early June for schools to submit that to the exam board with the grades for those students. So that's how it works, and the exams officer within each school will be obviously in charge of that process.
Okay, it was my fault for giving you the wrong question. Mine was about flow tests. So I do beg your pardon. Could you give me an answer back on the flow testing? So all the children do the flow testing. Where are they sent these?
Oh, those tests.
I know. I've been in trouble with other ladies today with questions incorrectly, but I've got this problem that I cannot see that someone's chasing up the results of the testing. So is that a case that I'm correct or not?
There's a database that schools, so that the tests on school sites in the first 2 weeks, those were all submitted through a database and collated. I don't have the exact technical response to your question, but they were all collected through a central database. As we've gone to home testing, there's no system to pick up the results of the home testing.
That is, I think, something that I think we should make a note of, Chair. It's all very well to note that the testing's been done, but if they're not checked and we don't get results back, it's like somebody came into my door the other day. They're doing mass testing in the area. We completed our paperwork, we left it all with the people, and that was nearly 5 weeks ago, and we've had nothing back. So, you know, that's where the little sort of brain goes, do we actually know what the situation is? Is somebody chasing the government to make sure? So, question over. Thank you.
I think that might be something more for public health rather than for Julie.
Yeah.
I think it's probably more for public health question.
I think the difficulty is that it's not a role that you could ask schools to play to chase those what are effectively voluntary tests done at home. You know, you're very much reliant on social responsibility of the families.
Okay, Councillor Mahmood.
Thank you, Chair. And Julie, good to know that your clarification about the issue we raised in the last meeting in terms of digital inclusion. And I'm very passionate about digital learning, as I mentioned you in the last meeting. So can I just assure through you, so we are not experiencing any digital poverty in the borough. And as you mentioned that we are all right in terms of equipment, in terms of access to the network. But my second thing is, like Councillor Mida said, and you, in terms of laptops in Southall and access to the children, but how much is important to digital skill for the parents? I just wanted a clarification that, and are you thinking to give that skill, digital skill to the parents, or digital equipment to the children? And the third thing is that, is it when the peoples are doing their online classes, is it, I'm sorry about that, I don't have any experience. So are the parents are around there physically? Are they allowed, or they need to be there in order to get things done in terms of online learning? That's the clarification. And the last thing is that you mentioned that £98 per child during access, or for the access to the summer activities. So just wanted to make sure. So I want to understand. So that fund will be given by the government to us, and we are all right with that. So we don't need to worry about that. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. So digital poverty and access. So I have to say, at the beginning of the pandemic, that gulf was huge. There was a massive gulf between the children that could access devices and those that couldn't. By February 2021, I would say that gulf had significantly closed, and that was really down to the work of schools in getting their hands on whatever devices that they could. And you know, we encourage schools to stop, you know, really stop at nothing in order to equip children. So I think the issue that I highlighted before was less about access to a device than about difficulties in households with data, you know, with access to data, broadband, and I you know, that digital poverty gap is still there. But I think what we have now, you know, a year later, it are far more children with the right equipment at home, which can only be a good thing. In terms of skills for parents, what we're trying to do is join, sort of align what we've learnt and share it with the council's skills, employment and adult learning team, because they are initiating a number of pieces of work to help to really skill up more adults in terms of digital skills. So what we're trying to do is work together to see whether we can support families with that. And then what we did notice during the course of the pandemic is, yes, quite often parents were there in the background, and they were there because they wanted to learn. So they were actually learning alongside their children. And that's one of the positive spin-offs of all of this, is that for the first time, parents were able to understand what their children were learning at school. I think many parents were flabbergasted by what their children were learning and horrified in some cases. But, you know, as a very positive spin-off, you know, what you had probably for the first time ever is parents being able to access, you know, learning alongside their children. So sort of in the background, absorbing it. So that was a very positive spin-off. Oh, and funding. Yes, that is money that is passported to the local authority from central government to broker or commission, I should say, holiday provision for those children who are entitled to it. It's not a lot of money, but it will certainly go towards something.
All right.
Great. Any further questions? I've got a couple myself, but any further questions from anybody else on the panel? No? Okay.
Yes, Chair.
Oh, yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, because she explained about the technology, the computer classes. I think I suggest to the officer or myself, I want to learn more computer. But if the parents will learn the computers, how to run, how to this and that, they can help the children from the very beginning. It's a very good advantage to the education's our system. So should be 2-3 centers should be open in South for the parents in future, not now because it's a critical time. Just keep in mind, but it will very helpful. Thank you.
I will. Thank you.
Okay, great. And we can look again at kind of digital exclusion when we look at the recommendations for the final report. So we might look at kind of beefing them up a little bit, Councillor Midda, based on what you've just said there. Because I think the recommendation's a bit weak at the moment. Yeah, so just a couple of questions then, Julie, just to finish up on maybe. So one was around, I know you said there's kind of this holiday provision, but there's a different word for it, but like the catch-up sort of provision, isn't there? So, you know, so the kids can kind of make up for some of what might have been missed. How is that working? And, you know, because I think is the government has got like a set of private providers that it recommends, and there's been some issues, haven't there? I saw something in the paper about basically kids in, I can't remember where they were, Sri Lanka or somewhere, who were actually teaching our kids for something like $1.50 an hour. So there has been, you know, a bit of kind of controversy about some of the government providers. In Ealing, what are schools using? Are they using these government providers, these kind of private providers that the government is recommending, or are they using their own staff? Because I know the school where I'm a school governor, I think we're using our own staff. And I'm just wondering how that's going. and whether we think it's sufficient. Is there sufficient assistance there for schools to kind of, make up for the loss in learning that many kids have had? Then another question was just related to the issue of budgets. I just wanted to check, because I know schools are only allowed to have, I think, is an 8% surplus in a year, or they get into trouble with the borough. And I think quite a few schools have got more than that this year as a surplus, because they've been closed. They didn't have loads of kids in for quite large proportions of the year, so they haven't actually spent money on things that they would normally spend money on. Is there leeway on that for schools, and have we made clear to schools that there is that leeway? Because I think some schools are a bit worried about money being clawed back, and there will be lots to spend next year to make up for some of the damage that COVID has done. And then I just wanted, then on mental health, you've rightly flagged up mental health as an issue and something we have to work on. Is what support can we give around mental health, and what funding is there? Is there anything additional? Because we know CAMS has been seriously underfunded for years. There are like 2-year waiting lists to speak to anybody. Has there been any improvement in that? Are we still having to deal with that broken system in picking up the pieces after COVID? Because it doesn't seem that if we're relying on CAMS, we're not going to, it's not going to work unless there's other provision involved. Again, I know my school uses a provider and spends money on a specialized provider around mental health who are very good. But schools have to make difficult decisions to prioritize that and to put the funding in there, and then they can't put the funding in elsewhere. And I think just finally, it was on the Southall project. It does seem like we're putting a lot on schools. There's a list of things there that schools are going to do in Southall. And again, is there support and funding for schools in Southall to be able to take on that much bigger community role?
Thank you. I'm actually going to start with that one and work backwards if I could. You're quite right. And I forgot to mention something very important, which is that when I said that ELP were involved in the sort of Southall project, we're putting a bid together, a 3-year bid with John Lyons, and we're constructing it around those activities. And you're quite right. We're trying to draw down some additional resource for this, and we're trying to build capacity within each of the schools to make those connections between families, schools, digital confidence, digital resilience, and also wider access to mental health and well-being activities, whatever shape they are. So yes, the reason, which I forgot to say, the reason we pulled all this together in the first place is because we wanted to make a compelling bid, and in order to draw that funding down. So I'm very happy to report back on that once well, hopefully when we're successful. The third area, so going backwards, so the mental health, the sort of universal services and provision versus the targeted CAMS provision. There's a huge amount of activity going on. We're lucky in that we've got a very strong health improvement in schools team, and they've been coordinating a mental health program for all schools, i.e. to help skill up teachers in responding to the, if you like, the lower level anxiety and indications of strain that children are showing, and indeed adults are showing. So there's quite a lot of work going on at a universal level. There's also something called a Trailblazers project going on in 21 schools, supporting those better structured pathways, the pathways between the universal and the CAMS. So there's quite a lot of work going on there through the Trailblazers program, and I'm happy to provide a summary of that if that would be useful. you're quite right. The strain on what is already, 2 years waiting lists in some cases for CAM services clearly isn't going to lessen. So I think what we're trying to do is to develop as many kind of self-help approaches as we can for schools, for families, and for children, and that's that probably best encapsulates the approach that we're trying to build on with schools at the moment. And some of these kind of longer term mental health impacts, won't really become clear, I think, until for a little while. I think, on a positive side, I think children have bounced back perhaps more robustly than perhaps a lot of professionals anticipated. So we need to try and get an understanding of really the scale of need, and that will become clearer in the coming weeks and months. And then use of budgets and surplus. Yes, a very different landscape, because some schools have lost huge amounts of income generated through wraparound provision, and other schools, as you say, have generated a surplus. So it's quite a mixed picture. There are also schools that have falling rolls, unexpected falling rolls, because of 5% unexpected dip in pupil numbers in primary. So it's quite an uneven landscape out there. I think the answer is yes. I think there's certainly a degree of tolerance, but as with all things, what we would want to see are robust plans for that expenditure, and how they're linked to the new emerging priorities as schools begin to audit that properly. So I think it's about schools just having very robust plans for spend, and that's the message there. And then the catch up. Yeah, I mean, even the phrase catch up is becoming a bit is generating quite a lot of anxiety in children and young people. This idea that perhaps you've got to go and do a crash course in subordinate clauses because you happen to miss that bit, has caused quite a lot of concern in schools. So we're trying not to use the words catch up. We're trying to focus on learning recovery and on the kind of learning to learn skills and resilience for learning, rather than missed content. Because it's simply not possible to plug all the gaps of missed content in terms of access to the curriculum. So I think, as you suggested, the approach to catch up has not been to jump on all of the government initiated schemes, but rather to work on the skills that schools already have. Teachers are very, very proficient at identifying gaps in learning and understanding and misconceptions and addressing those. So schools would far rather utilize their own expertise than be, as you suggested, going online and engaging with perhaps a graduate or somebody who doesn't know the child and hasn't contextualized that learning within the curriculum. But we're pretty confident that schools have the skills and resources to organize that kind of support.
Great, thanks for that. Okay, any further questions to Julie?
Yes.
Yeah, Councillor Mida, go ahead.
Sorry, my question is slightly different. I want to ask from the officer, how many primary and high school in London Borough for Ealing? So we can make estimate how much money we are spending on the education. Sorry about that.
There are 96 schools altogether. 66 primary, six special. 2 pupil referral units, and the rest are secondary schools.
Thank you so much. Sorry about that.
That's all right. I had to think. You made me think then.
That's like one of those questions,
I
Julie,
know.
isn't it? When
Yeah.
the Prime Minister gets asked what's the price of a pint of milk, you know?
Yeah, that-
Well, and it changes every year, so I have to like try and remember.
You passed. Well done.
Thank you.
yeah, because we can estimate how much money we need it, because in India I was teaching in college. So we can make the budget. We know how many colleges in our area, so we can divide the money. That's why I'm asking. Thank you very much indeed. Thanks.
All right. Okay, so thanks very much for that, Julie. That was really, really useful. And I think, you know, in the main, kind of like a very positive story of what our schools have been doing. So I think we'd want to, you know, add to what I think we said last time, is to thank all of our schools and all of the staff in schools, teaching and non-teaching staff, for everything they've done. And will continue to do, because it has been a real challenge, hasn't it? And with the rules changing so often, it has been a real challenge for our schools. So please pass on the thanks of the panel. So we will be looking at our overall recommendations in a moment. So I'm wondering if we should hold off thinking of any recommendations as a result of this and look at the recommendations in the round. That probably makes more sense, doesn't it? So if we sort of finish up this item. So unless there's anything further anyone wanted to add, Councillor Mahmood and Councillor Donnelly, you both have your hands up, but I think they're what we now know as legacy hands. Is that right?
Unfortunately, I can't tell at my end whether the hand is up or down. So I have to now try to remove it.
Yes, remove the hand.
We can see your head.
Yeah. Councillor Mahmood, is your hand still up, or is that a legacy hand? Councillor Mahmood?
I'm sorry, Chair, that's a legacy hand. I'm just trying to, yeah.
You've got the same problem as Councillor Donnelly.
Is that
That's okay.
mine disappeared down?
Yeah, yours has disappeared, Councillor Donnelly. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, great. So let's move on then, and thank Julie for both of her appearances at this committee. And we put you to work here.
Certainly did. Yeah.
So now we're going to move on to the final item 7, and this is looking at our final report, and in particular the recommendations that are in section 11 of the report. And what we're going to do is we'll just look through each of those recommendations. Those recommendations come out of our previous meetings, where officers have kind of pulled together some of the thoughts that came out of the meeting. But it is entirely, you know, our decision as to whether we're happy with those recommendations. We want to, you know, change them, beef them up, add to them, come up with entirely new recommendations. It is up to us. We did look at education previously, so there is a little bit in there on education, but we might want to add to it or change it in the light of what we've now heard. And so we just agree what recommendations should go in that final report. And there will then be comments from officers who might look at the recommendations and say, oh gosh, this is going to be difficult, might not be able to do it, or else it will say, yes, we can do this, accepted, and this is what we will do. And the final version of the report, myself and Councillor Sumner will, hopefully you will agree to delegate us the power to be able to make any tweaks that are required, just to get it over the line, as it were. So if we're all okay with that, hopefully you can all go to this section in the report. I'm going to just find it in mine too, because I'm just using one device, so I can't see you guys as I look at it. So it is item 11 in the report, recommendations, and it's page 51 of the overall agenda for tonight. So we had 6 recommendations. I can't quite remember, perhaps Anna-Marie could remind me. I think we made an agreement that we would try to keep the recommendations from scrutiny panels to a slightly lower number than we have had sometimes in the past.
Yes, that was the guidance from the recent review into scrutiny.
Yeah, and I think, because I think I was on a panel where we had 35 2 years ago, so it was probably our fault. But could I just check, was there a number 8 bandied around at some stage, or did I make that up?
That I think you might have made that up.
I might have made it up.
It's just guidance. If members feel that they need to make more, then I'm sure that's fine.
Okay, so we can add to them then. We're not stuck at 6 or at 8. That's okay, great. Okay, so what I'll do is, what I propose to do is just go through the ones that are in the report that we've got in front of us one by one, and take any changes, or you can dump them completely and say, we don't like that one, and then we'll have any additional ones. So I'll just start with the first one, which was, we talked about volunteers, that we were impressed by the number of people that volunteered, and we recommend that the council consider how to work with those volunteers who were not utilised and ensure that the widespread community engagement lasts beyond the current crisis into the long term. Any thoughts on that? People agree, disagree, or want to add or change at all? I'll give it a second. Well, oh, Councillor Donnelly, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, I've worked out how to work it properly. I think the only minor amendment I guess I'd make, and of course I wasn't around in the early meetings when these things evolved, maybe just a tiny amendment to say work with those volunteers whether or not they were utilised, because I think maybe with time having passed, it's not on the boil as it was in terms of those people who were utilised, who did volunteer and were active in the way that it was perhaps when these things were being discussed. So maybe just to tweak it to say whether or not they were utilised at various points during the pandemic emergency.
Yeah, I think that seems fair. I mean, at the point, as you say, the issue was that there was people who hadn't ever been called to volunteer, and we were worried about losing them. But as you say, there's people now who did volunteer but are no longer volunteering, so we want to hold on to them as well. So that seems fair to me. Is everybody okay with that? Yep, great.
That's okay.
Okay, so we'll stick with that recommendation then. I think it's still valid, isn't it? So recommendation 2 was the panel recommends that although it was clear that the lack of BAME representation in the Gold Command structure was reflective of the senior leadership team, that consideration be given as to how staff from the communities most affected by the pandemic could be involved in the discussions on responding to the pandemic and plans for recovery. So this was just to remind people that this is the Gold Command structure, as it were, within the council, which is mainly the senior leadership team. And the point was made that, calling a spade, the senior leadership team are all white, and we're talking about a virus that has a disproportionate impact on Black and Asian residents. So that's what this was about. Anybody got anything they want to add or change or beef up on this one?
Chair.
Mm-hmm.
I just, I support the recommendation. I don't think the bit in the middle is actually a recommendation as such. So where I think we could simply say the panel recommends that consideration be given to how staff and that bit, and the other bit isn't in the recommendation. It's just an observation about the ethnicity of the different command, the Gold Command and senior leadership team.
The only thing I feel, Councillor Lasardi, is it sort of loses the kind of the specificity of the point then, doesn't it? Because it might sound a little bit motherhood and apple pie, and it could mean anything. It doesn't necessarily mean the Gold Command structure. I think it was Councillor Dins's point, actually, wasn't it? Where he said basically there is a room with four or five people in it who are making these decisions about how we respond to a crisis that is affecting Black and minority ethnic people the most, and those 4 or 5 people are all white. And if we don't kind of specify it relates to those 4 or 5 people, I guess officers reading it might just mean, oh, they mean just, talk to Black, Asian, minority ethnic people generally.
In which case, shouldn't we recommend that there be more, a better ethnic distribution in Gold Command then as well? The way it's worded doesn't suggest that, does it? It's just saying it's observing that's the case, and then it's not making a recommendation that we try and check or something will be done to change that.
Yeah, that's a fair point. I think it might be slightly diluted from what was said on the night. So,
Chair?
Yeah, go ahead, Councillor Mida.
Yeah, what's the definition for the Gold Command?
I don't know if it stands for anything, but it's basically, you know, a bit like COBRA. The government has COBRA, which
COBRA
is that,
yeah. Is emergency meetings called.
Exactly, and the Gold
So-
command is the same for Ealing.
Oh, it's looking me different. Gold command, you know?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, thanks.
Okay, so let's see if we can rephrase this then. So maybe it's the panel notes the lack of BAME representation on the Gold command structure, comma, reflective of the senior leadership team, and recommends consideration be given as to the diversity of the senior leadership team and how staff from the communities most affected. Does that work?
Yeah.
Chair?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I was saying again. I'm assuming this forward's evolved from seeking to reassure the community that the only reason that the Gold Command team looks so non-diverse was because actually that's who the senior leadership team are, and also in a sense that it's, you know, the panel may have taken the view it was above its pay grade to make specific recommendations about how recruitment to the senior leadership team should be done, and that I'm assuming that therefore you've worked through to get to, don't worry, it's not deliberate snub, but what we should do is make specific effort to ensure that we're adding in expertise from across the whole community for these and similar events. And in that sense, I think probably your original form of words is still what you want. Would be my view.
Yeah, I'm just reading it again now. I mean, I think Councillor Donnelly is correct, because that was the point made on the night, that the SLT, you know, that is just what the SLT is. And that is why there was a lack of representation in the Gold command structure. And I think what we talked about because I guess we're thinking about what would be the answer to this. And what we talked about being the answer was potentially, you know, inviting other managers into the Gold command structure who might be from a BAME background, but weren't necessarily in the senior leadership team. So that was kind of one of the ways of addressing that. So with that in mind, Councillor Lusardi, would you be okay with leaving the wording as it is, bearing in mind Councillor Donnelly's point that, you know, we're not actually making a recommendation around the recruitment of SLT. What the committee was talking about was a recommendation around who is in the Gold command structure.
Yeah, I agree entirely with the sentiment that, you know, possibly on an ad hoc basis, you need to bring in different people and to make it more representative and more diverse. So I'm happy to go with, you know, I'm happy to leave it as it stands. It just struck me that the way it stands, we're not recommending anything. And given that we want, you know, ideally recommendations ought to be succinct, I think having removing the bit I suggested we remove would have made it more to the point, but maybe it loses the point as well. So I'm happy to go with is keep it as is if you want.
Great. Yeah, I think because it kind of does lose the point a little bit, I think, when you take it out, because if somebody reads that not having been involved in the conversation, they might not know that, you know, that's what we mean. It is about the Gold command. So okay.
Because the time is not suitable now. So let's keep it like that, as it is.
Great. Okay, then let's move on to recommendation 3, which was the panel recommends that the council should work in conjunction with Southall Community Alliance to develop a poverty strategy, and that this should be taken forward as soon as is feasible. And it says this recommendation is being progressed separately. So I think that was quite a strong feeling of the panel at the time. This was our first meeting, so that was at our first meeting, and there is some work going on this already. So are people okay to stick with that one? Yep.
Yeah, it is.
Great.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Yeah, we
Sorry.
are okay. Yeah, I agree with that.
I'm going to make myself really unpopular.
Oh, go ahead, Councillor.
Sorry. Could we put with Southall Community amongst others, just to not to preclude any, if we don't, or is this specifically to do with Southall?
It was specifically to do with Southall Community Alliance. Remember, they came to our first meeting and they proposed a poverty strategy.
Yeah. Again, I support that entirely. I'm just wondering if we don't want to broaden it out to other groups that might be interested in, developing something along those lines.
So we could, with Southall Community Alliance and other appropriate groups. Yeah, are people happy with that? And other appropriate groups? I think if we have the word appropriate in there, then that gives us some cover, you know.
Yeah, it is because they are doing well. Southall Alliance Group, they are so many different things for the Southall communities. Very active.
Great. Okay, then we'll go with that one. So the next one was about, so this was a public health related one, and this is about the vaccine, that public health and the communication and democratic services teams consider using councillors' own experiences to promote vaccine take-up. I think there's a typo. It should be maybe vaccine take-up rather than taken up. Anyone got any thoughts on that, or is there anything we want to add to it? But it was mainly, I think, about, using photos of councillors or, little social media posts having your vaccine to try and persuade others to have their vaccine. But is there anything else that we would want to add to that?
Councillor hasn't.
No.
Okay. Okay, hold on a second. So I've got 3 people who look like they want to speak. Councillor Steed, I think, was jumping in first.
Thank you. I thought that had been done to some extent now.
Yeah, I think there has been some, hasn't there? I've certainly seen, I've seen the leader of the council get his vaccine, and I've seen a few others, so it may well have been. Councillor Midda and then Councillor Donnelly.
Can I come first?
Mm-hmm.
So, Chair, because the vaccine, I have my vaccine last month, I sent the photo on the website on the councils, and I spoke on the community radio as well. So I spoke to my own group. I run one group in Southall, Apna group for the ladies. So I sent them everyone's a photo. They are very excited. They are happy. The main thing I want to send the photo to encourage the people go for the vaccine. So it was very successful.
All right. Yeah. And I think that buys into Councillor Steed's point that some of this is already happening. Councillor Donnelly?
Yeah. First of all, congratulations to Councillor Midda for that work. That's saying.
Thank you.
But also, I think there has been, every couple of days, I think the mayor's vaccine was retweeted by way of encouragement. And I think the key thing has been about not so much, I didn't get a photograph when I was vaccinated, but I don't think I'm really the problem area. So it was about focusing in on those parts of the community where where it was suspected there would be more reluctance to be vaccinated. And I think the work's been done very, very hard there. But also, like Councillor Malcolm, Councillor Steve's colleague, he tweeted, and I think that was he was aiming again at a particular, that wasn't age-based. That was about, if you've got the sort of conditions I've got down here and get sorted out. And I thought that was a great thing that he did in doing that. So I think lots of people have been pulling together there. And it's almost, in a sense, almost the time expired recommendation is its problem.
So perhaps we could step back from it a little bit and just see, what is the learning from it, and is there anything the council can learn in the future? And I suppose one of the things is, whether we need to build on some of these routes into those communities, because I think it did take us a little bit of time, for example, to get Mrs. Midda on Desai Radio, that kind of thing. It took us a little bit of time to identify these routes into communities. And I think initially there was some issues with, misinformation on WhatsApp groups, that sort of stuff. So perhaps there is a recommendation around, the council's communications team having a much broader range of communication routes that it uses to get to some of our Ealing communities, and not just focusing on the kind of tried and traditional methods and around Ealing that aren't necessarily always read and don't necessarily always get to the people that we want to get to the most. Would that be a kind of a more helpful kind of future focused recommendation? Councillor Sumner.
I was just going to add that obviously we're only halfway through the jabs at the moment. There's a long way to go. and also people are misbehaving is the only other way I can put it. There's riots taking place, which isn't helpful. And I think that we should be sort of minded to the fact that we're not even halfway through the battle yet. All I had to say.
Yeah, no, it's a fair point.
Yeah, good point.
So did you get that, Anna Marie? Would we be able to put together a recommendation that's a bit more future focused and around making sure that we, really kind of take from the learning that we've had from this way of communicating with people?
Yes, you're right. Sorry.
Sorry, Councillor Bidder. Yes, Councillor Costigan, we can work on a form of words that will address those issues. And I think, as Councillor Sumner said, we're still at the start. So we've got the second dose and we've got the other age groups still to work through, and pockets of vaccine hesitancy still within those older age groups. So yeah, an ongoing piece of work.
Great. Okay, that's helpful. Yeah.
Chair, I've already had my say, but of course, now we're opening up on the summer holidays and people disappearing out of the country, and nobody knows what's happening later on. So I think we should be mindful of that with other varieties being brought back into this country if people do misbehave.
I wonder if we can somehow fold into this recommendation as well. It's sort of about communications. There have been these task group meetings that take place, COVID task group meetings.
Yeah.
They take place in Southall, in Acton, in Greenford and in Northolt. So I think they're particularly focused on areas where there might have been some issues with vaccine hesitancy and also with some misinformation earlier on in the pandemic. I wonder if we should fold in something about reviewing how they have worked and whether they have proved an effective route into some of these communities. So we can have it all as the one recommendation. So kind of one more about the comms team and the other about kind of communicating with residents through these groups. I have some concerns myself about whether they work. Councillor Midham will know better than me about whether the Southall one works.
Yeah, it's really helpful. The other thing is that Evelyn, she's doing fantastic job. Every day she's sending the message to the people to convey by message this one. It's a very good thing. So might be you will laugh. I was the first one. I got the vaccination from other councillors. So they are laughing on me. So I encourage all the councillors as well.
Great. Okay,
yeah,
so
thank you. Can I get my input?
Yeah.
I'm a member of Perryville and Greenford Task Committee, which we have done our meeting a couple of hours ago. But that's, I think their performance and their contribution needs to be calculated, included in the scrutiny. And in my view is that I think in terms of community engagement, I feel there's not much happening in terms of their attendance, in terms of the community groups. Not many community groups are attending what it should have been expected. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks for that, Councillor Mahmood, because that reflects my feeling about the Northolt one actually. So I think it would be helpful if we had then a recommendation around reviewing how the COVID task groups have worked. And if we said robust review, not just marking our own homework, but a robust review of how those have been working.
Agree with you, Jim.
Yeah, brilliant. Are you okay to take that on board, Anna Marie?
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
Great. Okay, let's have a look at the next one then. I'm sorry, I've lost my document. I've got it again now. Right, so that was a kind of public health one. So now we're down to number 5. And it was, as more services are provided online, it's important that residents are not digitally excluded. The panel recommends that the council works with the community to make sure that people are skilled to be able to confidently engage with the council using digital channels. I did feel when I saw that it's quite weak, because I think at that meeting, I remember having a go myself saying, I've been at meetings in Southall a few times where the council has come and said, we're going to look at digital exclusion, and then nothing has happened. And that does sound like a fairly weak recommendation, but has anybody else got any thoughts? Councillor Steed, you're on mute.
Thanks. I agree. It sounds pretty vague.
Yeah, I wonder if there's a way we can strengthen it.
Chair, can I quickly say something?
Yeah, go ahead, Councillor Sardi.
Yeah, I'm happy for it to be strengthened, but I also, at the end, I would like something added that as a sort of a fallback position. So not everybody, yes, we do need to train people up and so on. I'm happy, but not everybody will be trained and not everybody wants to be trained. And therefore, I think we need to say something along the lines that there will always be an alternative means of communication for people who want to get in touch with the council or need to receive information from the council. And that, you know, so that we're not excluding anybody, be it digitally or you know, via post or whatever. So I think just a fallback statement saying that, you know, there will always be some sort of other means of communicating with the council.
Yeah. Okay. Any other thoughts from anyone? Was that Councillor Steed again? Yeah.
Yes, sorry.
And then I've got Councillor Donnelly, I think.
Councillor, I mean, is it really down to the responsibility of the council to make sure that everybody is digitally capable? I'm not sure that it is really, is it?
I think
how does the council do that? I mean,
only if you to know where to take your rubbish and on which day and how to report stuff, then they're very interested in making sure you know how to use the computer.
I think the point of the recommendation is we're talking about council services. So making sure people aren't digitally excluded from using council services. So if we only provide stuff digitally, then it may exclude some. I think that was the recommendation. So not broader digital exclusion. Councillor Donnelly?
Okay.
Thanks, Chair. Well, I think the problem, and I can, once again, you know, I see how it is that you got to this form of words, but the difficulty is that these two sentences could have been copied and pasted from any council report of the last 20 years. You know, I was around when we may well have used exactly those words in the first time we ever reflected the first government act to Parliament decreeing that councils move towards the provision of digital services. And that would have perfectly been adequate for a report issued in the year 2000. Maybe what's missing is something that links it back to the specific experience that we've had and how we could take something that we think hasn't gone well and could be improved, or something we think has gone well and could be shared more widely.
So it needs the word COVID in it to, you know, the beginning is as more services are provided online, as you say, that's been happening, you know, for the last 20 years. So actually it needs to be due to this step change in access as a result of COVID. It is, you know, well, I don't know, it is more important than ever residents are not digitally excluded. But then it's around, I think what you were saying, Councillor Donnelly, is to, you know, institute a full review of what has worked and what has not worked in terms of providing online services.
Full review.
Yeah, instigate a full review, yeah. And bring forward actions as a result of this.
Can I say something?
Yeah, go ahead, Councillor Mida.
Because when we have a surface from the council, everybody have a problem that time because we haven't get any training, this and that. So we keep phoning to the desk. The people are asking, how can we go this and that? Sometimes it's stuck, but very hard we learn these things. So every councillor have issued a training for the surface in future, please. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a good idea. So we need to make sure we're not digitally excluded as well. Absolutely.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Okay, so we're going to beef that one up then considerably, I think. So we are going to actually ask for a full review of what worked and what didn't work, and what actions could be taken for the future. Is that okay, Anna Marie?
Yes,
Yeah,
I have that recorded. Yeah.
Excellent. Yeah, just want to make sure that we don't forget. So everyone happy with that? Great. So then the next one was the panel are concerned that some pupils did not have access to digital devices when learning remotely, and asked officers to do as much as they could in the 3 areas of lobbying nationally, working with local charities, and considering whether Ealing Council needed to add funding. So this may again be one where the issue is no longer as urgent as it was at that point. It seems like Julie's saying that we no longer have that as much of an issue. Does the panel think that we need to kind of move on from that recommendation?
Yeah,
Any
Chair,
thoughts?
sorry, I
Yeah.
don't know, so you are happy, and because as you know that I'm very passionate on that. So as I mentioned, people don't need pen, pencil, papers. They need laptop, Wi-Fi, broadband. That's the world we are living in. So I'm sure if and this is a long process in terms of digitalizing your borough internally, externally, and from other ways as well. So I'm strongly recommend that to be included.
Okay, so you think there's still outstanding issues, so you'd still like us to push that one. Okay, we might need to kind of rephrase it a bit, but I think it's a fair point. Councillor Donnelly?
Yeah, I mean, I think again, this is one which was absolutely perfectly fit for purpose, 6 months ago when everything was first raging. But maybe we're in a position now to say that what we go on to do is conduct a review with schools, which is partly a kind of census of where they are in terms of what they have, what they need, what they think they need if this happened again, and take the learning points, work out where the holes are that need to be filled, and then return to issues around funding, which is I guess what this was particularly about, because clearly we've managed to get a lot right from everything that Julie was saying, but we'd be foolish to think that there was, as Councillor Mahmood was alluding to, we'd be foolish to think that there was nothing more to do, because I think there's plenty still to do.
To Chair.
Go ahead. Go ahead, Councillor Sardi, and then Councillor Sumner.
Yeah, just to support what Steve was saying. Yeah, things, hardware and software change so rapidly that it may well be that, as Julie said, that enough students have got laptops at the moment, but they'll probably become obsolete very quickly. So I think it's one of these things where you can't really stand still, because the technology will overtake you very quickly.
Councillor Sumner?
Well, that's actually almost what I was going to say, which is that maintenance of these devices, is it in place? I mean, how many of us we have to get help to even run our own systems? And of course, if that's not written in there somewhere, there won't be the maintenance for people changing whatever it is that platform they're on or whatever. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. So I've forgotten now the word Councillor Donnelly put forward. Was it an audit? Was that the word you used?
Census.
Census, was it? It looks like Councillor Donnelly froze there. He didn't move a muscle when I mentioned his name, so I think he's frozen and fallen off the meeting. But I'm sure he'll reappear. So it's good that you recalled it with census. So I think we're saying then that we would recommend that a census of schools is undertaken to assess the impact of online learning and the access to online learning and how that has worked, what has worked, what hasn't worked, and what might need to improve for the future. Bearing in mind Councillor Mahmood's point, really, that I guess this might mean that there is way more education happening online in the future, and we don't want our kids to be left out.
That's right, Chair. Yeah.
Are you happy with that, Councillor Mahmood, then?
Yeah, that's right. I'm happy and support that. Yeah.
Right, and we've got Councillor Donnelly back. You froze there momentarily, Councillor Donnelly.
Oh, thank you. Sorry for that, Chair.
And now you're doing magic. It says that you're mute, and yet somehow you can speak. So amazing. Okay, so I think that was that our final recommendation on the Yes, so that was the final recommendation that we had. Were there any additional recommendations, either from tonight or any of the previous meetings? Anybody got any? I had one. I just, having gone through the minutes of the previous meeting, there was one that jumped out that I think that we neglected to put in the notes. We did ask about homeworking in the last meeting. Remember, we had Liz Childs talking about homeworking and the impact on council staff. And one of the things we asked about was managing staff working from home, and particularly now that we're looking at doing that much more in the future. And of course, now the decant of Percival House is going to take place kind of in one go. So staff may be working from home or working remotely much more. And we did talk about, you know, managing staff that are working remotely, working from home, in a way that focused on outcomes rather than presenteeism, you know, and understanding the different ways that you manage staff when they're working from home. And Liz said they hadn't quite got there yet. And it wasn't something that they were yet kind of on top of. So maybe we need a recommendation around, you know, the council needs to develop a, you know, a managing staff whilst working from home policy. That, you know, ensures staff's health and safety is protected whilst working from home, and that they, you know, are managed in a, you know, in a way that is fit for purpose or something like that. Does that make sense?
Yes, Chair.
Yeah. Councillor Sumner, you're
Yes.
sighing.
Well, it's a bit personal, really, but if the officers are more interested in their budgets and consequently not overspending them or not spending them at all, then people like us, the councillors, aren't going to receive any papers for meetings, and we will have to go and collect them from our, well, from the town hall. But if the town hall isn't going to be there and we're going to find an office somewhere, I mean, to my mind, I think we should be grown up about it, and we'll make the recommendation that people need the equipment to do their work. And it's not just looking at a screen. I can't operate from a screen and the paperwork. I need to have the papers. So that's why I was sighing, because no one, especially the man who's in charge of me and of Anna Marie, doesn't seem to understand my needs. So thank you.
Oh, I
Yeah,
think
can
we've
I
all
come back?
felt your frustration, Councillor Sumner. Yeah, Councillor Mahmood?
Yeah, Chair, as far as my understanding, that's what we are all be thinking, always thinking to be top of the game, and we are always be thinking we should be paperless and penless consular. And I think this is something we should be proud of, that to be fit for 21st century consular. On the other note, Chair, can somebody clarify me if any of the consular
Do you mind
needs
if I jump in there, Chair?
Sorry, Councillor Sumner. Could we just let Councillor Mahmood finish?
Councillor Mahmood. I mean, quite frankly, I made what I thought was a valid statement there.
Councillor Sumner, could we just let Councillor Mahmood finish? I think it's about 8:45. I'm sure we'd all like to finish by 9.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Councillor Mahmood.
As far as my understanding is that I think papers are always available if you request that, and papers are always will be available in the town hall to be collected. That's my understanding, Councillor.
Oh, that's obviously not Councillor Sumner's experience, but I think if we can focus here on the residents of Ealing and the staff that we have a duty of care for, just whilst looking at these particular recommendations, and perhaps if we have any issues about our own experience as councillors, we can raise that in our groups or with the whips, etc. So,
can I say something?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yes.
Councillor Mida, is it related to whether councillors get paper copies? Well,
yep.
I'm not going to take any more, I'm afraid, on whether councillors get paper copies of minutes. If people have issues with that, they can raise it.
I want to explain. The council, they ask for the paper. Who is interested to get the paper?
Councillor Mida, yep. I think Councillor Mahmood has made that point. So that's great. Thanks. Now, both of you are backing us up. That's great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Great. So let's move on. So are we happy to add that homeworking point about having a proper policy to manage homeworking, looking at health and safety, well-being of staff,
yes.
And yeah, are people happy with that? Great.
Yes.
Okay. Any further points, recommendations that we want to add, perhaps from today's discussion? Was there anything that Julie raised that people think we should add? I think we may have lost Councillor Donnelly again, unfortunately. I don't know if there's anything we can add on mental health. I think it's really shocking there's a 2-year waiting list for CAMHS, but I'm not sure that there's anything the council can do about it, to be honest. Any thoughts on that? I don't. Nope.
Not really.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, there's not a lot we can do about it, is there, Councillor Midden? There's just the service is not properly funded.
Yeah.
Unless we say, we could have a recommendation that the council, you know, lobby government on funding for CAMHS in the light of the impact of COVID on the mental health of young people in the borough.
That's a very good point, Chair. I think the officer should be continue lobbying the government for that funding and resources which needed.
Yeah, okay, we can do that. You know, like I say, I don't know if we can achieve anything, but we can try, can't we? We should have ambition. Okay, so we're happy to say that as a final. Was there anything else then? Are we okay then with that set of recommendations?
No, we are all right, Chair.
Yeah, happy with that. Great. Okay, so what we'll do then is the officers will just put those last few recommendations in and complete the draft version of the report, and myself and Councillor Sumner will just sign off the final version based on the discussion that we've just had, and then it will go to Cabinet. And I believe there will be a further there may be a further COVID panel next year. I imagine there will be, as we're still in the middle of it. Okay. So I think that then brings us to the end of the meeting. I don't think that there is anything further that needs to be discussed.
Councillor Costigan, Councillor Sumner wanted to say a few words.
Yep, sure, Councillor Sumner.
Yeah, nothing to do with papers.
I was going to ask.
Okay.
Thank you, Councillor.
Seriously.
Thank you.
Seriously, as this is the last meeting of the committee this municipal year, on behalf of the committee, as Vice Chair, I'm delighted to thank the Chair, Councillor Deirdre Costigan, for carrying on her duties in an efficient and pleasant manner. I also thank our officer, Anne-Marie Rattray, and all the officers who have helped helping us to make our decisions, including Anna Bryden, Julie Lewis, Alison Reynolds, Liz Childs, Ed Axe, Tamara Quinn, Karen Gibson, and I'm sure I've missed some of them out, but thank you on behalf of the committee.
Thank you, Councillor Sumner.
And I will take that up with the Chair later, the other matter.
I'm scared now.
Sumner, I'm happy to talk to you off the line.
Thank you very much for that, Councillor Sumner. And can I just say a huge thank you to all of the panel members. You've all done a great job this year, asking lots of questions and keeping officers on their toes. But, you know, most of all, making sure that we're standing up for local residents in a time of real crisis. So thank you all very much for the work that you've done.
With us this evening, by the way, I've just seen her thing, but we haven't actually seen that she's actually in the meeting. I
believe that she is in the meeting, yeah. And I've got Councillor Donnelly is back in the meeting as well. So so with that, as he's now back in the meeting, we've got everyone in here. I'll just say thank you again, and thank you particularly to the officers.
Can I say something, Chair?
Yeah, go ahead, Councillor Midden.
I'm really happy. You are smiling. You've done an excellent job. We are very thankful to the officer and you as well.
Thank you. Okay, well, listen, have a lovely evening, everybody. And whatever we do next year in terms of scrutiny, I hope that we all see each other again, and we have another good year of scrutiny next year, because scrutiny in Ealing, you know, really is very high quality, and it is you as panel members that make that happen.
Thank you, dear.